On the eve of my 65th birthday, my husband sat at the edge of our bed and told me there would be no celebration this year, that money was too tight, and we should just stay home and rest like any other night. The next morning, while he was in the shower, his phone lit up with a message confirming a reservation for 5 at one of the nicest restaurants in town. And as my eyes moved down the list of names, I saw his name there, and the names of 4 other women, but not mine. I stared at that screen for a long, quiet moment, feeling something inside me go very still. Then I set the phone back down and whispered to myself, "Oh, my dear, tonight, you are the one who will remember my birthday for the rest of your life." Thank you for watching and for sitting here with me for a while. It would mean a lot to me if you wrote in the comments where you are watching from, so I can feel a little closer to you while I talk. My name is Anna, and I have lived most of my life in Dakota, in a small town where the winters are long and the nights get very quiet. And I have spent so many of those nights beside the same man who just told me that my 65th birthday was not worth a celebration. I was not always this calm. You know, when I first met him, I was a young woman with calloused hands and big hopes. I worked long shifts, sometimes 2 jobs at once, and still I would hurry home just to cook his favorite meals and listen to him talk about his day. Back then, he used to look at me like I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He would bring me little flowers from the side of the road. And he swore we were a team, and that as long as we had each other, we could face anything. Years went by, we built a home together, we raised our child, we paid off debts, one little payment at a time, the kind that make you choose between new shoes and the electric bill, while he went back to school and then worked his way up in his company. And I was proud of him, truly proud. I used to tell everyone that he was the hardest working man I knew, while I folded laundry late at night and rubbed the tiredness out of my legs. Somewhere along the way he looked at me began to change. Not all at once. It was slow, the kind of change you only see when you look back. Instead of asking how my day was, he started coming home with his mind already somewhere else, his phone glued to his hand, his laugh saved for messages that did not come from me. And I told myself it was stress, pressure, the weight of years, because it is easier to lie to yourself than to admit that someone you love might be drifting away. I stood by him through sickness and job scares, through nights when he drank too much and said sharp words he claimed not to remember the next morning, and I held his hand when he thought he might lose his position. And yet on the night before my birthday, he sat on that bed in Dakota, in the same room we had shared for decades, and told me we should not do anything special this year, because money was tight, while his wrist wore a brand new watch and his shirt carried an expensive scent he had not used for me in a very long time. So when I saw that reservation for 5 people on his phone and realized that my name was not there, it was not just a dinner that hurt me. It was every little moment I had swallowed down. Every time I had told myself not to make a fuss, all gathering in my chest at once, and still I did not scream. I just breathed in and out and thought to myself, "Anna, you have given your whole life to this man, and tonight you're going to choose yourself for the first time in a very long time." After I set his phone back down on the dresser and the sound of the shower kept humming through the walls, I walked into the kitchen and stood there for a moment with my hands on the counter, feeling the cool surface under my fingertips, while memories rolled over me one after another. I thought about all the birthdays I had spent cooking big meals and baking lopsided cakes, laughing when the frosting slid to one side. How I would stretch our little budget just to buy him something small that I knew he wanted. A tool for his work, a shirt he had admired in a store window, and how his face used to light up like a boy's when he opened it. In Dakota, the winters are harsh and the snow piles up high against the windows, and there were years when we could not afford to go anywhere fancy. So our celebrations were simple. A pot of stew simmering on the stove, music playing low in the background, our child running around the living room while we danced slowly in our worn socks. And I remember thinking back then that rich people could keep their grand parties because I already had everything I needed. As time went on, those dances stopped. He said his back hurt, or he was too tired. Our dinners turned into him eating quickly, in front of the television, or taking his plate into his office with the door half closed. And I started putting a little less effort into my own plates of food, into my clothes, into my hair, because I convinced myself that this is just what long marriages become: quiet and practical and a little lonely. Standing there that morning after seeing that reservation, I realized how many times I had told myself not to overreact when he dismissed my feelings with a wave of his hand. How often I had heard him say, "It is not a big deal, Anna, you are imagining things," and I believed him because I wanted to. And now here I was, 65 years old, staring at the truth printed in black and white on a glowing screen. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something inside me refuse to shrink. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the corner of my eye with the back of my hand, and thought, if he can plan a secret evening for other people while pretending we are too poor to celebrate me, then I can plan an evening of my own. One that will remind him exactly who he married. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel and walked back to our bedroom, not to look at the phone again, but to look at him. At the suit he had laid out on the chair, at the polished shoes waiting neatly on the rug, and I noticed the new watch resting on his nightstand, the metal face catching the morning light. The same watch he claimed had been a bargain he could not pass up, and beside it sat that bottle of cologne he used to save for anniversaries and special trips. Now suddenly important again when it came to people who were not his wife. I stood there quietly and said in my mind, "Anna, you have cried enough tears in this room. You will not waste another one today." Then I went to the small drawer in the hallway where we keep old notebooks and pens, took one out, and carefully copied down the name of the restaurant, the time, and the number of guests from memory, my fingers steady even though my heart felt heavy. There was a calm that settled over me, not the numbness I had felt in other arguments, but a clear, almost cold kind of calm. The kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself. And with that feeling sitting in my chest, I picked up the house phone, dialed the number of the restaurant I had passed so many times on my walks but never dared to enter, and waited for someone on the other end to answer, already knowing that this was the first step toward an evening he would never be able to forget. A young-sounding hostess picked up and greeted me with that cheerful, practiced voice restaurants use, and I told her my name was Anna and that I was calling about a reservation for 5 under my husband's name. I gave her his full name and heard the little pause as she clicked through her system, and then she said, "Yes, ma'am. I see it right here, private booth for 5 this evening." And I felt my stomach twist for just a second before I answered, "That is correct. I am his wife, and there is a small surprise I would like to arrange for him tonight, if you would be kind enough to help me." Her tone softened a little as she said, "Of course, what did you have in mind?" So I took a breath and kept my voice, even while my heart rattled in my chest. I told her that I wanted to quietly prepay the entire bill for the table as a special gesture, and that I also wanted to add one more guest to the reservation. A long-time family friend who happened to be our lawyer. I gave his name and spelled it out slowly, feeling a strange power in every letter. The hostess asked if we should change the card on file, and I told her yes please, charge everything, including a birthday cake for my husband, to his personal card rather than our joint account. And I dictated the numbers from memory because I had seen that card enough times to know them by heart. And I asked if the waiter might bring the cake out after the main course and say clearly in front of the table that it was from his wife. There was a small silence on the line, and then the hostess gave a little amused sigh. "I think we can do that for you, ma'am." And I thanked her warmly, my voice gentle, even as I imagined his face when that cake appeared in front of people he thought did not know I existed. When I hung up the phone, I stood there in the hallway of our simple home in Dakota, feeling the weight of the handset in my palm, and for the first time in a long while, I did not feel invisible or weak. I felt like a woman who had finally stopped waiting for someone else to honor her, and had decided to write the ending of her own story. After I set the phone back in its cradle, I went to my bedroom, changed into a simple but neat outfit, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. An older woman with soft lines around her eyes and silver woven through her hair stared back at me. And I thought, Anna, you have carried this family on those shoulders for decades. It is time to carry yourself. So I picked up my purse, slipped my identification and the folder with our bank papers inside, and stepped out into the crisp Dakota air. The sky was a pale blue, and the wind had that sharp edge that always makes me pull my coat a little tighter. But my steps felt steadier than they had in years as I walked into the bank where we had kept our money for so long. The same place where I had deposited paychecks from cleaning jobs, from late-night shifts, from all the quiet sacrifices nobody ever applauded. I sat across from the clerk, a man who had seen us come in together many times before. And I told him calmly that I wanted to move the portion of our savings that had come from my inheritance and my own earnings into an account in my name only. I explained that it was my right and that I needed to make sure I could stand on my own 2 feet. His face was polite, but I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, as if he had watched other women do the same thing before. He slid the papers across the desk, and my hands did not shake as I signed them. With every signature, I felt another invisible rope loosen around my chest. I walked out of that bank with a folder full of fresh documents and a new, quiet strength in my heart. And instead of going home like I usually would, I turned my steps toward the office of an old friend, a man who had known our family for many years and who now worked as a lawyer. Knowing that the next conversation I was about to have would decide the shape of the rest of my life. When I reached my lawyer friend's office, I sat down across from his desk, and for a moment I could not speak. All the years and all the disappointments pressed against my throat. But then the words slowly came. I told him about the phone, the reservation, the lies, and also about the years of being set aside little by little until I was more habit than partner, and he listened without interrupting, just nodding with that calm, serious look he has always had. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, Anna, you do not deserve to be treated like an accessory in your own marriage. You have rights, and you have every reason to protect yourself. And hearing someone else say that out loud almost broke me, but instead of crying, I straightened my back and said, then, help me do this the right way. He pulled out the documents, explained each page slowly so I understood exactly what I was signing, and I placed my name there again and again. Not in anger, but in clarity, feeling like I was reclaiming pieces of myself I had lost years ago. We agreed that he would attend the dinner that night, quietly and professionally, and hand my husband the papers when the truth could no longer be denied. And as I stood to leave, he squeezed my hand and told me that whatever happened, I was stronger than I knew. Walking back outside into the cool Dakota air, I felt lighter, not because the situation was easy, but because for the first time in a long while, I was no longer just enduring life, I was choosing it, step by trembling step, and I knew that by the time the sun went down, everything would be different. By the time I returned home, the day was already leaning toward evening, and the house felt strangely quiet. Not heavy like before, just calm, as if the walls themselves knew something was about to change. I made myself a simple cup of tea and sat in the living room, letting the warmth travel through my hands while I listened to the faint sounds of him moving around in the bedroom as he got ready. I heard the closet doors open, hangers sliding, drawers closing, the faint clink of his watch being fastened to his wrist. And for a moment, I remembered all the years I had watched him prepare for work or special occasions with a mix of pride and affection. But this time, there was only a steady certainty in my heart. When he finally stepped out, dressed in his best suit, smelling like expensive cologne, he barely looked at me, just adjusted his tie in the mirror near the hallway, and said he would be out late and that I should not wait up. His tone almost casual, as if I were nothing more than someone renting space in his house. And I looked at him with a softness he could not understand, and simply replied that he did not need to worry. I would not. He walked out the door with that confident stride I once loved so much, never knowing that the ground beneath his pride was already shifting. And when the door closed, I did not break, I did not pace, I did not cry. I just sat there and breathed. feeling the weight of years slowly lifting, knowing that the night ahead would not be about revenge so much as it would be about dignity. About finally reminding both him and myself that the woman he had so easily overlooked was still very much alive, and that she was done being invisible. While I stayed home that evening, sitting in the quiet of my living room, with the soft lamplight warming the corners of the room, I knew exactly where he was and what was happening, because everything had been arranged with care earlier in the day. And in my mind I could picture it so clearly, it felt almost like I was standing there watching. I imagined the restaurant, one of the nicest places in town, with dim golden lights, polished tables, and people laughing gently over plates that cost more than what we used to spend in a week. And there he was, sitting confidently with his coworker and the others, talking, smiling, and pretending he had done nothing wrong. Probably telling some joke, probably feeling proud of himself for hiding this night from me. I could almost see him loosen his tie a little, leaning back in his chair with that relaxed posture he used to save for special occasions, enjoying the food, enjoying the attention, believing he had pulled it off so perfectly. While at another table sat the man who had known us for years, quiet, calm, waiting for the right moment with an envelope in his pocket, and the truth tucked firmly beside it. I pictured the waiters moving around with plates, the conversation at his table fading in and out of laughter. And every now and then, I smiled to myself because I knew the night was gently tightening around him, like a story reaching its turning point, and he had no idea that the celebration he thought belonged to someone else was actually about to become his lesson, and the beginning of my new life. In my mind I could see the moment everything shifted. The plates had just been cleared away. The easy conversation at his table was still floating softly in the air. And then the lights near their booth seemed a little brighter, as a waiter began walking toward them, carrying a cake lit with warm little candles. And I imagined the smile that must have started to form on his face, confused but curious. Because he always liked attention, and he always liked feeling important. The waiter stopped right in front of him, set the cake down gently, and with a clear, steady voice announced that this was a special gift from his wife, wishing him a very happy birthday. And I can picture how his expression must have frozen, how laughter must have died in his throat, and how every pair of eyes at that table turned to him with shock and questions. I could almost hear his coworker ask quietly, "Your wife, you told us there was no celebration?" And while he tried to pull together a calm smile that did not belong to his heart, the lawyer I trusted stood up and walked over to them, placing an envelope in front of my husband with the kind of quiet dignity that does not need to shout. In that envelope was my voice, my strength, every unspoken tear turned into firm ink on legal paper. And there, in the middle of that beautiful restaurant, surrounded by people he wanted to impress, he was finally forced to face the truth he had been hiding, while I sat at home in peace, knowing that the night he tried to erase me from turned into the night he could never forget. Later that night, I heard the front door fling open and slam hard against the wall, his footsteps heavy and angry as he marched into the living room, with his face flushed and his voice shaking with rage. And he demanded to know what I thought I was doing, how I could embarrass him like that, how I could humiliate him in front of people who respected him, as if the real shame was not in what he had done, but in the fact that he had been caught. He paced back and forth, waving his hands, talking fast, trying to twist the story so he could be the victim, saying I misunderstood, that it was not what it looked like, that I had overreacted, and I just sat there on the couch, calm, still, watching the man I had spent most of my life with stumble through lies like a frightened boy caught red-handed. When he stopped long enough to look at me, really look at me, he finally seemed to notice that I was not shouting, not crying, not begging. I simply reached beside me, picked up the folder from the bank, opened it slowly, and laid the papers out one by one on the coffee table, every page a quiet reminder that I was done being dismissed. I told him everything was in my name that rightfully belonged to me, that the lawyer had explained everything to him already, and that he no longer had the right to make decisions over a life he did not care to honor. And the fury in his face began to fade into something softer and sadder. the first flicker of fear, maybe even regret. But it was too late. I looked at him with a steadiness he had not seen in me for years and said that he did not want to celebrate my birthday. And that was fine, because instead, I chose to celebrate my freedom. And the room fell so quiet that I could almost hear both of our hearts learning a new truth at the same time. The next morning, the house felt completely different. The air was lighter somehow, as if someone had opened a window inside my chest and let years of heaviness drift away. I woke up early, not from worry or habit, but because my mind was quiet and my heart was strangely steady. And I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the table like a woman who finally belonged to herself again. The sunlight came through the window and rested gently on the floor, and I watched the steam rise from my cup while I thought about everything that had happened. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of tired sadness mixed with relief. Because I realized I had spent so many years waiting for him to see me, to remember me, to choose me, and now I no longer needed him to do any of that for me to feel real. I walked through each room slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a picture frame, feeling the quiet history of a life I had poured my love into. Not as someone who had lost everything, but as someone who had survived enough to finally say enough is enough, and I whispered to myself that I was proud of the woman I had become, even if the road to get here had been painful and long. There was no loud victory, no dramatic happiness, just a deep, steady peace, the kind that grows when you stop begging to be valued and start valuing yourself. And as I sat down again with my coffee, I understood that what happened was not just about a dinner or a reservation. It was about years of being pushed aside and finally stepping back into my own place, standing tall in it, and deciding that I would never again allow anyone to erase me from my own story. When I look back on that night now, I do not see it only as the end of a marriage. I see it as the moment I finally chose myself after spending a lifetime putting everyone else first. And I want you to know that it is never too late to do the same in your own way. No matter how many years have passed or how many times you have been told to stay quiet and accept less than you deserve. I learned that love without respect slowly empties you. That pretending you are not hurt does not make the pain disappear. It only buries it deeper, and one day it comes back as a heaviness in your chest, as tired eyes in the mirror, as a birthday where you are told you are not worth celebrating. And that is no way for any person to live. You are allowed to draw a line and say this is enough. You are allowed to protect what is yours, your heart, your time, your future. You are allowed to walk away from a table where you are only ever served crumbs while others feast on what you helped build. And you are allowed to start again with trembling hands and a steady soul. If my story has reached you, if it has stirred something quiet inside you, I want to thank you from my heart for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you know to have you here, listening to an old woman from Dakota telling her truth. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, more lessons learned the hard way, please subscribe and stay with me so we can keep talking. And maybe help each other feel a little less alone.